All right, guys, we've now got a condensed out of position with traps versus a linear in position, and we've got a 5-to-1 SPR. So things are now much deeper. And how do we expect out of position to behave? I don't even think we need to pause the video. If you watch the first two and you're going in order, you should expect out of position to check. Okay, so out of position with this range, you've got a mostly bluff catcher range with the trap in it. Sometimes make sure you're checking. Okay, so just to relate this back to in-game play, because that's what the whole point of this exercise is. If you check called the flop and check called the turn, your range is mostly bluff catchers. The other guy is betting into you, right? Your opponent's betting into you. You're check calling. Okay, your range is mostly hands that beat bluffs and lose to value bets. It's not mostly really strong hands. If you had a range that was stronger than your opponent's, you should be the one doing the betting. So of course, if you check call the flop against the under the gun, and then so you call pre-flop, under the gun having raised, under the gun C bets the flop, you check call, blank turn, under the gun bets again, you check call. What should you do on the river? You should check. Does that mean you never have a trap? No, you should probably have a trap sometimes. You should have the nuts sometimes. But mostly, you probably have a pair of nines or something, right? Like mostly you have some kind of medium strength hand, and really you kind of just would really like things to go check, check. So you check the river. Your opponent's range will probably be more polarized in this. It probably won't be linear, but that's okay. It's to be honest, it's fine. And you check to your opponent and kind of decide what to do. Okay, so that's kind of like to some degree what this represents. And here we are seeing jacks again with this 10% lead size. We've talked about this in the previous video, so I'm not going to explain it again, but we're mostly checking. Okay, this just goes to show you how powerful betting is, even in the context of this really condensed range. It goes to show you how powerful betting is when you have a hand that beats the vast majority, beats a large fraction of your opponent's range, but really has no business check raising. So yes, it's a 10% size, but the same kind of methodology would apply to thinking about how to play pocket jacks here. And yeah, with that, we can go ahead, give it a pause, and take a look at the in position strategy. All right, guys, we've now got the in position strategy, and no surprises here in terms of its execution. We've already seen that in position doesn't want to bet bigger than pot when out of position has the nuts as frequently as it does. And so pot size is the biggest sizing choice that we're observing here. Seems reasonable. So again, I think really important, someone who looked at these two ranges, someone who looked at, aces and then jacks through sevens, and then saw that the other guy had aces through queens, might have thought like, hey man, you should be doing a bunch of overbetting. You should be using like a bunch of really big bets, like yada, yada, yada. Nope, not really. You should just be potting it. And so in this way, you guys can start to see, you've seen where 5x pot is appropriate, under what conditions is a really big overbet appropriate, and under what conditions is a really big overbet inappropriate. And so again, for me, and you're going to hear this when we go through the hands, no limit hold'em is much more about understanding what not to do than it is understanding what to do, right? So understanding what not to do, what's that mean? Well, that means understanding what not to do. How far would that get you in this type of a situation, right? Like how far would understanding what not to do get you to the right answer? Well, we would know we could eliminate 10% and 30% from the in position strategy, right? We could cut these out. We've learned that, like we've had that pounded into us over these sims, right? It's never shown up ever. Now that doesn't mean it never shows up. Again, I could produce conditions where it would show up, but that's beyond the scope of this material because it's nuanced and it's very basically inconsequential to your win rate, and I would rather not confuse people. So 10% and 30% bet sizing, cut it out. So we know that those sizings are gone. What about really big overbets? Well, we know that really big overbets are not going to work when the other out of position player still has the nuts at a full weight and the range, and it's a reasonable representation in the range, right? So keep in mind, for out of position here, there are only 6 combos, right? So the nuts is 1/6 of the range, or 16.67%. So given that, that's a significant enough fraction of the range to never use really large bets. It's a mistake to use really large bets if your opponent can have the nuts at that sort of a frequency. We've observed that. So we could have eliminated at a minimum 5x and 3x pot. Could we have eliminated 2x pot? I mean, without seeing this particular subset of sims, maybe not. Maybe without seeing this particular subset of sims, we couldn't have. But we could have definitely limited the strategy to like 2x pot, 1x pot, and half pot. And maybe people who have done a little bit more work, maybe those people could limit the strategy to 1x pot and half pot, which is exactly the right answer. Now, would they get the distribution and allocation of hands to each respective range perfectly correctly. Not perfect, but they would understand that, you know, they should bluff with the bottom of their range. Their opponent's range starts at pocket 7, so bluffing with 6s, 5s, and 4s makes sense. They would understand that if they're betting pot, 2/3 of their betting range should be value and 1/3 should be bluffs. So they need to manage the ratio of bluffs to value bets, or the total overall allocation of these bluffs to the betting range is something they would have to be cognizant of and manage. They would know that. They would know that their opponent's range starts at pocket jacks and they're only betting pot, so they would know to bet for damn sure with aces, kings, and queens. And they would maybe some people would pure bet jacks, maybe some people would mix jacks, who knows? But all of a sudden, and they would know to definitely check, you know, 9s through 7s, and maybe some people would screw up and bet pocket 10s or something, and some people who are more dialed in would for sure check a hand like pocket 10s. But when you think about a hand like pocket 10s and you think about betting it, pocket 10s is going to, if you bet pot with pocket 10s, your opponent has to defend half his range, right? So half the range is what? Aces, jacks, and 10s. The other half is 9s, 8s, and 7s. So if you bet pot with pocket 10s, what happens? Well, all the hands that you beat fold, and all the hands that beat you or split with you call. So betting pot with pocket 10s is pretty stupid. So you can pretty quickly figure out that betting pocket 10s to pot size is non-viable. Maybe you could bet it to half pot or something. That seems like kind of a bad strategy as well, especially since it would just be a sizing choice that's kind of like, yeah, I mean, like you wouldn't, I think you could relatively quickly figure that out as well. So, and all of a sudden, we're at a strategy that looks pretty damn close to what this solution looks like without actually having the solution on hand. And really, that is what we're trying to do when we play No Limit Hold'em. When we play No Limit Hold'em, that's what the goal is. The goal is to come up with a very elegant, organized, clean strategy that makes lots of sense, that if you solved it, would reflect the same sort of principles and ideas that would drive the solution in the end for the solver, without actually having a solver present. So you're formulating high-level strategies without the presence of a tool to help you. And really, that's what this whole video series is about. I don't think I need to explain too much about specifically getting into the combos here. I think that sort of covers how the spot works, and I'll see you guys in the versus bets section next. All right, guys, so let's go ahead. We're going to take a look at the two bet sizes we've got. We've got pot, we've got half pot. We're going to see what the counter strategy is, and then we're going to look at the versus check raise strategy, and then that's going to be it for this one. So let's go. So versus pot, of course, we're expecting 50% fold here. Don't think anything should be different in that regard. We get 50% fold. Very nice. We see that aces raises. Very nice. We see that these hands are indifferent and they get allocated to call, fold, and bluff. Doesn't conflict with anything that we've got going so far. So that's pretty clean. What we do see is that the sizing choice on the raise is not a jam. We see that it's betting 325. And that's somewhat interesting. But I think that what it comes down to is if you think about it, it's just comparing opportunity costs here. Okay. So if you bet 300, then what happens, right? So, well, we know that if we bet 325 by raising, the full percentage will become 525. The total pot will be 525. And the full percentage we'd expect to see would be 62%. Okay. And if we were to bet 500 and we were to get a defend percentage, the total pot would be 700 after the bet. And we would get a 71.5% fold, 71.4% fold. So obviously, when you have aces, you'd prefer to be up against the lower fold percentage, because that means you're getting called by worse hands more often. But of course, there's a trade-off where the payoff shrinks, and we can go ahead and evaluate that very quickly in the as we take a look at the in position strategy versus raise. But for now, we can move right back into the half pot sizing choice and take a quick look. You can see also that with the half pot sizing choice, pocket aces really prefers 300 as opposed to 500. We would expect that to be consistent. And we also see the same kind of bluffing parameter. We would expect 33% folding. Why do we expect 33% folding? The bet's 50, total pot's 150, 50 over 150 is 33% fold, is 1 over 3. 1 over 3 is 33%. And so that's the full percentage that we would expect. That's what we got. And yeah, in that regard, I don't think that there's too much more. Again, jacks is like, the pure play here. I don't think that there's much more, though, to explain about how this is working. And we can go ahead and take a look at some of these check raises and see how they work. All right, guys, let's take a look at this versus check raise now. So we're going to look at this like hypothetical check raise first and see if you bet 500, it's true you get called by worse, but not very often. Most of the calling range, if you jam for 500, will just be pocket aces. And of course, what that means is that there's no value in it, right? There's no EV if you're never getting called by kings and queens, there's no EV in shoving to 500 chips. Most of the range is just going to be pocket aces, right? And that's something that you actually have to think about when you're playing. When you're playing and you're trying to select your check raise sizing, you have to make sure that you're thinking about what your bet size, what the implications of your bet size are for the rest of their range. So when you check jam, for example, you want to make sure that you're not check jamming for so much that your opponent's calling range is now just the nuts. And the same thing is true, about making it too small. You don't want to check raise and make it so small that your opponent's defending range is very wide, and still includes lots of hands you beat, but you're making no money, right? So you have to try to optimize that relationship, okay? And one of the ways, there's no shorthand version of that. It's just something, it's just a thought experiment that you have to make. Like, if I make it this big, what fraction of my opponent's range am I up against? How am I doing? If I make it this big, what fraction of my opponent's range am I up against? How does that look? And you want to make sure that you're getting called by a healthy number of inferior hands, but that you're making it kind of like as big as you can, really. So in that regard, you can see here that if we check jam aces, we're really making it as big as we can, but we're really not getting called by worse hands very often. And 325, even though it looks like it's not so different, it's enough. And this is the sizing choice that optimizes the value of pocket aces in this regard. Now, it's important to look at this and see, you don't have to get called by worse hands all the time, right? Like like pocket kings and pocket queens aren't always calling. And this is still a better raise size than, for example, 200, right? Like, we could have min raised, but we could have made it to 200. And like the fraction of our opponent's range that calls as pocket kings or queens is going up, but we're not making more money because we're, of course, making less chips per call. And so the raise size that optimizes the EV here is 325. Now, scientifically or mathematically, is there a good way to predict this? No, not really. This is just about comparing kind of like outputs or opportunity costs after the fact. You can do the math, and you can do the math, like you can do the math, but you can't do it while you're playing, which is what matters. Like, you can, I can figure out how much money we make check raising to 325, and I can compare it to how much money we make check raising to 200 and how much money we make check raising to 500. That's all well and good, but it's useless because you can't do that in game. Like, nobody that I've ever met has ever been even remotely close to being fast enough to make a kind of 3-stage calculation like that. So you're going to basically do this empirically, like where you check raise, you pick a sizing, and then you kind of check your work later and see if it's good. Check raise, you pick a sizing, then you go and you see, and you check your work later and you see if it's good. As far as real world play goes, that's pretty much how it works. That's how all the high level players that I know improve this. I don't know of anyone that has a different approach to that. So that's against the pot size, and then against half pot, we're still making it 300. So 200 still sucks. So does 100. And so, like, just for illustrative purposes, we could make it 100 here. And we're almost always getting called by the bluff catchers. We're almost always getting called by kings, queens, and jacks. Like, yay, we always got called. Unfortunately, we made no chips, right? We went from 50 to 100. We made almost no money. And of course, that doesn't maximize our EV at all. We are much better off trying to get paid far less often, okay, allowing these hands to fold far more often, but winning a much larger pot when we do raise, okay? And again, like, yes, you can mathematically figure out how much each node is worth on paper. That's totally doable. And actually, we used to do that pre-solvers. Like, I've done this like by hand before. Not a lot of times, to be honest with you, but I've done this by hand a number of times in the pre-solver era. But in the post-solver era, what we all do is empirically just like run sims, check your work, run sims, check your work, figure out if your raise size was good, figure out if your raise size should be bigger, if it should be smaller, etc. Try to get dialed in that way. Be cognizant of nut ratios, how often your opponents have really strong hands. Make sure that you're getting called by worse hands at a reasonable frequency, but not too often, because if you're getting called by worse hands too often, it's too small. Okay, so understanding that balance that you're trying to strike is really important. And with that, we can move on. Thanks, guys. Speak soon.